Welcome to Transcendent. I'm Joe and I'm the dad.
And I'm Raya and I'm the daughter.
I finally figured out what to do with tofu.
Well, I would like to know because I've tried to make tofu and I feel like I've never done a very good job with it.
Okay, number one, you throw it in the garbage. And number two, grill a couple of brats. We've dealt with a lot of issues here at Transcendent, and somebody brought up an interesting one just the other day. They referred to the fact that they remembered that you talked about having used a therapist.
Yes.
And they were saying, well, what am I going to get out of that? Why would I do something like that? I couldn't answer that question because I've never used a therapist either, but a lot of people have. And you felt really a benefit from him. Am I right?
Yes, I sure did. And we discussed that back in our July 1st episode that we jokingly titled as Exposing Raya's Deepest Insecurities.
Yes.
And it was a conversation that I had been having with my therapist, and it was on my mind, and I said, I think this would make a really good episode. And you and I talked a little bit about this, but people have wanted a little more follow-up information. Why would you go and I would suggest, if you haven't heard that episode, it's definitely worth listening to. It's not really so much about my deepest insecurities as it is talking a little bit about this. But today we want to come at this in a little different way, talking about what kinds of things might prompt someone to go see a therapist, a mental health therapist here we're talking about. I remember at one time in my life, we figured that the old joke goes, anyone who needs to see a mental health therapist ought to have their head examined.
It's right.
And we really made fun of that. We thought, for the people that need that, that's great. But that's not me.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't be anything that most normal people would want. And I realized how silly that is. That would be like saying, I'm really good and healthy physically, so I don't need to see a doctor.
Right.
No, we should be going in once a year for your physical exam. And a mental health therapist is not just there to fix you when you're bad, but also to help you see some potential pitfalls, some areas where you might be struggling, and help you get some perspective. Lots of reasons to go. Well, anything that can help to increase your mental health.
There are a lot of things we do in our life that can be very stressful and very concerning, and they really create a lot of trauma for us. For example, when you make a major move, you pick up all the stuff in one house and move it to another. There could be a lot of trauma in something like that. And when you move across the country, you lose all your friends. Well, you don't lose them, but you don't have the daily connection that you had. Everything is completely different. You pick up your life and change it. And that is the kind of thing that a therapist can walk you through and make you feel a little bit better and do a whole lot more. I don't know what a whole lot more is, but that's what we're here to talk about. It's the same thing if you lose a job. That's very traumatic. Yeah, the birth of a new baby is very traumatic for the household. It's just one thing after another. Actually, the loss of a close pet sometimes really is difficult. Not sometimes, almost always. You can become so close to a pet, and when that pet is gone, it is really a difficult thing for a while. You've got to go through that grieving period. There are all kinds of things like that. But in this case, we are talking about the LGBTQ plus community. And talking about that, there is trauma or potential trauma in coming out in having come out and created new problems and lost friends that you didn't expect, and in dealing with family members. And then there's trauma of the family themselves, that they're having a hard time possibly accepting it, wanting to, but not sure they can. They can't be affirming and they feel bad about it. There are just so many things. So tell me, how is a therapist going to help us?
Well, lots of different kinds of ways. And the first thing that we can do is get rid of the stigma. The days where we are stigmatizing you for going to see somebody need to be done. And because it's just a way to live a healthy life. So the first thing that I want to look at is in coming to terms with LGBTQ issues for yourself. I've discovered that there are a lot of people that have come and heard some of the talks that I've given or have been a part of LGBTQ and ally kinds of groups that have been saying, I want to be a better ally. But deep down inside, they've known that maybe they're part of the community as well, but maybe weren't quite ready to admit that yet, or that was not feeling quite so good yet. Because there's lots of issues and it can be very scary. And one of the things a therapist can help you do is to navigate those things that feel very scary, to help you explore some strategies that you can use for dealing with things that feel overwhelming.
When you go to a therapist, what's it like? Is this a 1 hour session? Do you go in there and lay on a couch and then they talk to you like that, like they show in the movies?
I actually mentioned that to my therapist the last time I went in. I said, you don't have a couch here, and no therapist that I've ever seen has had a couch. And she said, there are still some apparently that have that, but that's kind of the old style, and that's not really how mostly that's done.
So you go to a therapist that doesn't have a couch, suddenly you face your first disappointment.
I wanted to sit there and tell you all about my childhood traumas, how I was scarred emotionally by my parents.
Okay, so you go there, and it's not the couch situation that we used to see in the old movies generally.
And also generally, I make a joke about that, but it's generally not about how you were scarred by your parents either, unless that's what you're going there for. But I think those old days of, well, let's see how you were treated as a child, and oh well, you probably none of this is your fault. It's all their fault. No, what a therapist is really doing is saying, let's look at the issues that you're dealing with, and let's see if we can pick out the issues that are causing this and see, do all of those issues really make sense? Are there some things that you can do, or are there some ways that you're looking at things that are creating a problem where there shouldn't be one or doesn't have to be one?
Now, is this a standard visit? This is exactly 1 hour?
Usually, yes. So usually they will do 50 minutes, 55 minutes, maybe an hour. What I've tended to see is like 50 to 55 minutes so they can have a little break between one to the other.
So I have a situation, and I think, well, maybe it would be helpful if I could see a therapist, because I'm not getting along with my son or daughter, because they going to come out and I'm going to have a problem with that. So I walk into the therapist and she says, oh, hi, what are you here for? And I say, well, I've got this problem. My kid thinks that she is a lesbian, or thinks she wants to be. And I don't want to lose her, but I just can't buy this. Is that how you start a conversation?
Well, okay, that's a great question. Normally what they will do is the therapist wants to establish a long-term relationship with you. So usually they'll have you fill out a form.
Oh.
And they'll ask a variety of different questions centered on why you're coming there, but also all kinds of other things in that form. And everyone is going to have their own system of how they put this together. And then you fill that out. And usually the first session is them going through And oftentimes they'll have a standard list of questions that they'll be asking. It's kind of a get to know you, but it's also kind of probing to find out what are the real issues here. And then oftentimes they will end by laying out a roadmap for you so you know what to expect. And maybe it will also lay out a roadmap for them because they may need to go back and do some additional resource or find some resources for you to get going.
Now, how often, if you decide you're going to see a therapist, how often do they usually want you to come? Once a day, once a week, once a month, or is it each pattern different?
It would be on a case-by-case basis. It depends a lot on your situation and what you're dealing with. So sometimes maybe you're dealing with something that's a real life situation right now. So you might be coming in once a week or maybe even a couple times a week. When I was wrestling with my own issues right before I came out, I had a lot of insecurity and just concerns about how is this all going to work out? And so I was seeing her quite a bit for a very small amount of time, maybe a month or two, but I saw her many times during that. And I was really emotionally vulnerable at that time also. It was really a very, very difficult time. And then once I got through that time period, then we backed up and then we did, for a little while, we did once every couple weeks and then we did once a month and then we did a check-in every few months and that was about it.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like going to a doctor and you've got a problem and he takes X out of your body and then he says, well, come back later on.
Exactly. And in fact, if I could make an analogy, I just went in recently to the physical therapist because I've had, now that I turned 50, my body has decided to just stop working. And my foot has been sore and my shoulder was sore and I couldn't lift my hand and I felt like the entire right side of my body started hurting. So I got a referral to the physical therapist and I went in for 6 sessions. And I did weekly, other than there was 1 week where I couldn't do. So we kind of came up with a schedule. And then after we were done, he said, if you need to come back again, then we'll do it. He said, but you're feeling pretty good now? I said, yeah, I am. He said, if you discover you're having an issue, just give us a call and we'll get you on the schedule and that will be fine. And that's a lot the same way that it works.
So you had a problem with your foot, and you went in there and began by just getting a foot in the door.
Yes, I sure did.
Uh-huh.
And then he gave me the cold shoulder. I'm very glad that I did because I was incredibly sore, and what they did really worked. You know why that is because he went to school for physical therapy and he's trained in all kinds of techniques. He gave me exercises that I never knew existed. And when I did even a few of those, that really helped to get my body back to where it was supposed to be. So when you see a mental health therapist, you're seeing somebody that has gone to school and they know all kinds of mental exercises that you can do.
Uh-huh.
They might have things where they might give you a journaling exercise to do, or they might give you a quiz to take that then will bring some resources. They might recommend some books for you. They might recommend some other resources that you can go, all kinds of things that go beyond anything that you would know on your own.
You know, I think there's a lot of people out there right now who have never seen a therapist, and the first question that really is coming into their mind is, how much is this going to cost me? Does insurance pay for it? Does insurance pay for part of it? How can I afford this kind of thing if I'm going in there twice a week for a time?
Well, and that's certainly the hard thing is, how does insurance work? And that depends on you and your insurance. Now, for me, I've had different times when my insurance would kick in, and then it made it a little easier to go because I had already met my deductible for the year.
I see.
Sometimes you may have an insurance that's a little better on covering things. For me, at my job, I actually have a resource that they give me where you can do a phone counseling for up to 6 sessions for any given issue that you're going through. And that's covered for me by work, which is really nice.
Boy, that sure is.
And that would be a telehealth version. It's a great way to do that.
You know, now that you mention it, I know somebody who has been doing teleconferences and for quite a while, and that seems to work. Is that a little cheaper, or is it just more convenient?
It really depends on your situation. I think it depends on how is everything, working for you and what do you need. Just like with my physical therapy situation, my specific needs dictated how we handled things.
How does a person find a therapist?
Well, it's really important that you find someone that you connect with. And a good way to do it is by going to your insurance and saying, who is covered? Can you give me some ideas?
I see.
And it's best if you can have them send you a list. So, for instance, for the insurance company that I work for, when somebody asks me, I can go online and I can run a whole list of the insurance companies or the therapists that take our insurance, and then I can email them that list out. That's a good place to start. You can also go online and you can see reviews for people, just like Yelp reviews for anything else. You can see reviews for doctors as well. The best thing is to make sure that you do find a good doctor that you really connect with.
I am Mark Ziemer, a listener and supporter of Transcendent. I've been a Lutheran pastor for 45 years, and oh, what a journey that was for me to understand the LGBTQIA community and what that meant. I was so not understanding and hurtful. So this podcast is incredibly important to really educate and understand and to hold relationships together. So I urge you to consider listening, of course, but also supporting. You can go to transcendent.com and click on the heart with a support button. You can give as little as $3 a month and you can cancel at any time. Important for all of us on this journey of understanding, keeping relationships together, truly being people of love.
How do I know if I start going to a therapist? How am I going to find out if this is working? How long do I have to go before I say, oh, this is working for me and it's worth it? Am I going to have to go for 3 months or 4 months or 6 months or 2 days to find out, yeah, this really helped?
Well, I think I would ask you as the person that's going, because you will know when it has helped, because you will be the testimonial. You'll say, this was really good. And if you don't have a testimonial about how good it's been, then maybe it's not working so well, and that's not a person that's a very good fit for you.
So going back to the question I was asking, do I have to keep going for months and months before I discover it? Or would I find out pretty quickly, yeah, this isn't working for me?
Well, I went 6 times to the physical therapist, and I am still a little sore in those places, but I feel like I'm good for what I need right now. That's not always the case for mental health, but it's not the case either. Again, every circumstance is different. What I would say is, if you don't sense after 6 sessions that you're making some progress, it's probably not the right fit. And even 6 sessions is quite a few. You'll get a good sense. I would say give them more than 1 time. After 2 or 3 times, you should have a pretty good sense of how do you connect with the person? Is the kind of guidance that they're giving you something that works with your personality and that sort of thing? One thing that is different from our physical bodies is that we all have such radically different personalities, and what works for me in helping me to have stronger mental health isn't necessarily what will work with you, but many will.
So will they tell you what their fees are before you start?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So the therapist that I have on, I don't know if I would say I have her on retainer right now, but the person that I like to go see when I have time, right now I probably schedule her an average of about once a month just for a check-in, just to talk about whatever is going on. And for her, I really, really like her, and she actually doesn't take insurance. So I have chosen to pay that out of pocket. Although thankfully, because with my insurance, I have an HSA, And so I'm able to pay directly from that. So at least it's tax-free, which is nice, but I'm still paying out of pocket. That's actual money that I'm paying. And oftentimes you'll be paying maybe between $100 and $200. Seems pretty reasonable, but you might get it less than that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, think about what would you expect to pay if you're doing a doctor visit. Now, this one, I have chosen to do that because I have such a good connection with her. And that to me is worth it for the experience that I get. But if I had insurance paying for it, it would depend on my insurance and specifically how they have it all set up. And if I've got one that works really well, maybe I only have to meet a certain deductible and then I go in. Again, it just depends on what you have and how it's all set up.
Well, that lays the groundwork for the fact that we think people should, if they feel they're having some problems that they're not able to deal with, is that when you make the decision to go? Or would you think, well, everything's going pretty good, but maybe it could go better. I'll just go and see if I can improve my life.
Well, it doesn't hurt to have somebody there for you in the same way that when I go to lots of different things, they ask me, who's your doctor? Can we just have that on file? Why? Because you want to know where to go when you need to go. So It's helpful to have somebody that you know where you're going to go when you need to go. And then if you're having some issues, then you schedule those times. And again, maybe it's a half a dozen sessions and then you kind of back off for a little bit.
Well, as you know, because you've been listening to this podcast for a long time, but Raya, when you came out, we had a difficult time adjusting to all that. In the beginning, we didn't want to tell people. And you just heard the mom's story just recently and the way she talked about how difficult it was for her in the beginning. Should we have considered at that point a therapist?
I think if we could go back in time and if I knew then what I know now, I would have strongly recommended it. Because what they will do is they're trained to listen to how you tell the story. For instance, for me, when I was first dealing with these things, I would find myself saying something like, well, I shouldn't be feeling this way. And she would always pick up on those words, should and shouldn't, and say, shouldn't be feeling this way. Tell me about shouldn't be feeling this way. Where is that shouldn't coming from? Who's telling you that you shouldn't? And I found a lot of times, anytime I should be doing this or I shouldn't be doing that, it was unrealistic expectations that weren't coming from anywhere, that I had just decided were some way that I should be living my life, that were just entirely made up. What a therapist may have done for you at that time is when you're feeling those feelings like, oh, I shouldn't tell anyone. Our family shouldn't be like this. This isn't the way that families are. The therapist can challenge those assumptions and say, who told you that families aren't like that?
Uh-huh.
Well, I don't know. I've just thought that that's how families were. And a therapist can say, actually, here's the data. Or a therapist can say, who cares how families are? Doesn't it matter that you're all happy? Or they might say, whatever. They might ask you a series of questions and get you to arrive at your own answer where you say, actually, this thing that I've been believing all this time that I've taken for granted and never even thought to question was really pretty silly all along. And they help you see that in a new light.
So when we began to talk about this before we started actually recording this podcast, I was suggesting that a therapist could be good for, of course, people who are considering coming out or they have come out and they've got some concerns now. They've lost some friends. They've gained some new friends. There's a variety of things there, but also for the cisgender people who are out there and they want to be supportive, but they're not affirming, and it just tears them apart because you can't be like that all the time, can you? They feel like, I just can't accept this. That's the person who should see a therapist, and only that kind of person? Or do I have to wait? Do I not have to wait to get to that level yet before I would consider a therapist?
Well, there again, so they're there to help you. I don't think anyone would say, if you feel like you need to see a therapist, no therapist is going to say, no, I don't want to see you. Of course. But I would say if you're feeling like your communication is strong and you're fully accepting and everything is going well in your relationship, it's probably not something that you need to do any more than you need to go see a doctor if you're feeling good. It's good to do a check-in, but beyond that, there's not much more that you really need. But when you're noticing that there's issues, I'm frustrated all the time. I'm sad all the time.
Oh, yeah.
We're fighting all the time. Well, they can give you some strategies for how to communicate. For instance, they might say something like, well, tell me a little bit about when an argument comes up. Tell me the last argument that you had. So here your daughter's coming out and you're having difficulty accepting it. Tell me about that argument. What did she say or what did you say? And then what happened next? And then what happened next? Okay, and then that's when it kind of blew up and then this happened. Okay, let's go back and look at that again. Instead of phrasing it like this, what if you had instead phrased it like this? What if instead of saying it in a way that seemed accusatory, what if you instead told your daughter how you were feeling in the moment without any reference to her actions? Because of all of this, I'm feeling such and such. Oh, yeah, well, that's a good way to do it. And so then you work through, and now you've got another tool in your toolkit that you never knew about. And then the next time you go out, you leave the therapist's office, and you come back, and the next time that you're about to get into this argument, you pull out your tool that you just got from your therapist, and you say, hey, I was going to say this. Well, hopefully you don't, you just go ahead and you use it. And now you phrase whatever you were going to phrase in an accusatory way, but now you say it in a much kinder, softer way that gets your point across and doesn't cause offense. And your daughter says, oh, I've never thought about it like that. And now you have a good, strong, solid conversation.
I'm beginning to understand the benefit of a therapist. The way you're explaining it is helpful to me to begin to understand. Suppose I can't just make it a positive relationship with my daughter. Well, I tried these things that the therapist suggested, and it isn't working. Can I bring her in with me?
Talk to your therapist about that. Oftentimes, yes, but the specific therapist is going to have their own thoughts on what to do. Many will say, yes, absolutely. And others will say, I'm going to suggest we do it this way. Again, every situation is going to be different, and that would be a good question to ask them. Mm-hmm. How should we handle that? Sometimes that can end up being not so good, depending on the situation. I have heard plenty of times where the therapist is really trained in doing one-on-one, and they try to do something with couples, and that's not really what they do well, and that ends up being not quite where it needs to go. So if you're going to do speaking with the two of you together, you want to make sure that you're seeing somebody that's specifically trained for doing two people together and helping with those communication issues.
Well, let's turn now to the person that is considering coming out. They haven't told their parents, they haven't told their spouse or whoever it is, but they've been wrestling with it for a long time, and they go and see a therapist. Is that going to be the answer?
It's hard to say. Just the same way that it's hard to say, will seeing a doctor be the answer?
Oh.
You sure hope so, but you never know. And it could be that the doctor doesn't know. And it could be that your therapist doesn't know. But that therapist is going to have a much better chance at having the answer, just like the doctor is going to have a much better chance at having the answer. We go to specialists because they have training that we don't have. But that doesn't mean that they're perfect. Nobody is, and nothing's ever going to come out exactly how we want to. And so all we can do is do the best that we can, but I guarantee that they will be able to give you some insights and give you some new ways of looking at things that you maybe had never thought about beforehand.
Well, you're giving me a lot of really good answers here, and I'm trying to be the devil's advocate. And I'm asking all these questions because I'm thinking, tell me why I shouldn't go. And you're coming back with great answers, and I appreciate that.
It's a great, great thing to do. And especially if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're thinking, I wonder where I am for myself. That would be a great time to schedule that appointment. Or maybe you're listening because you care deeply about these relationships, but you've been having some trouble on your own about making that relationship work. Well, hopefully we've been giving you some tools to help, but that's probably not enough. That would be a good time to schedule that appointment. Maybe you're thinking, I'm doing pretty well. Maybe it's worth it just to set up a connection with somebody. Go and see somebody one time so you know where you can go if you need to. Your situation is going to be different.
So if you've got questions for us about this, write us. You send it to transcendent@gmail.com. And we always say we read everyone. And if you want us to address something like that, we'd be happy to do that. And as a matter of fact, if we have not brought up a topic that you really have been curious about, we want to hear about it. We'll do the research and we'll share our ideas with you.
I want to give a shout out to some close friends of mine I've never actually met in real life, but have had lots of conversation. One of our supporters, Carrie, and her wife, Wendy. Wendy herself is a therapist, and they have been strong supporters ever since they learned about this podcast. And I've learned a lot about therapy just from some of the stories that I've heard about Wendy. And she's come back and asked me, how does insurance work? Or oftentimes through Carrie as I get the things, but we've become close friends through that. And so always very good. So thank you to both of you for being listeners, and to everyone else. Thank you for being loyal listeners. We're grateful to have you every Monday morning here, where we hope we brought a good, positive message, and that you're seeing new ways that you can approach the world and approach the people that are closest to you in building those healthy relationships.
And you'll hear some new ideas from us again next week. With that, we'll see you Monday.